ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track, and ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
In golf, precision is everything, on and off the course. PGA of America chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business for smooth operations and seamless transactions. Together, we enhance ticketing and concessions for better fan experiences from gate to green. This is pro-level efficiency. This is PGA of America with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
Well, here we are, Margaret. I've got a question. I know you have an illustrious career, important publisher, dealt with many fascinating and culturally vital people. But what I would like to ask you about is Bexhill-on-Sea. Because you went to school in Bexhill, didn't you?
I did. I went to a very interesting international school called Charters Towers School for Girls. Well, it didn't have the for girls, but it was Charters Towers.
Where?
On Hastings Road.
On Hastings Road.
Yes.
Admittedly, now regular listeners will know we normally talk about Croydon, but I'm trying to annex Bexhill now into the Backlisted canon, and because my family comes from that part of the world, and so when I saw that you'd been to school there, so it was in Hastings Road, and would you go on outings to the De La Warr Pavilion?
We certainly did go there. I think we had our annual speech day there and did our school plays there.
Did you?
Things
Did you
like
have
that.
school plays there?
Had lectures from eminent people who went to there.
Like Bronowski, did you say?
Joseph Bronowski, I think. People like that.
Played the De La Warr Pavilion. There's a thought. And did you? Was there a good library in Bexhill then, or was there a good school library, or?
I can't remember too much about libraries, but I can remember we certainly were provided with daily newspapers. I remember when it changed from the Daily Telegraph to the Guardian. But I also had a way of discovering things in the local newsagents, and I found this wonderful literary journal called John of London's Weekly. And I used to write them letters about all sorts of things. They didn't know they were dealing with a schoolgirl. But I also, one week I got an issue of it on which there was a picture on the front cover of Noni Jabavu, a South African writer who was having her book reviewed in it. And I think she also went on to be an editor of journals like The Strand, but it was that image of an African woman on the front of a literary magazine that kind of gave me the inspiration that I could be part of the British literary field. So there you go.
And that was from a shop in Bexhill?
That was from
there you go.
At school at Bexhill, in Bexhill, Charters Towers.
Tiny acorns.
There you go.
We put Bexhill-on-Sea on the literary map. Hooray! And sites on the literary map. That was smooth, wasn't it? Right. I happen to know that you have moved from Hackney to where are you living at the moment?
Bloomsbury. Fancy pants, Bloomsbury.
Very appropriate for a poet.
I mean, yeah. I was actually going to move back to Hackney. I was looking for a place to rent, and I saw that because this was just at the very end of the pandemic, and I was like, oh wait, the rents have all flattened. Like it's the same to rent a place in Hackney as it is to rent a place in Bloomsbury. Hello, Bloomsbury. At that point, probably not now, but like I kind of had a golden window there.
Blue plaques everywhere.
Oh man. So I'd get to kind of walk my son through the literary landscape of Bloomsbury every day, which I can't wait to. I've already written about it. I've already got like stuff about Tagore and Virginia Woolf and all these poets. And
is he in nursery? Is he in a Bloomsbury nursery?
He's in a Bloomsbury daycare centre.
It's like Charleston Farmhouse.
I know it's like. Kind of.
Let's start.
We should. Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast that gives new life to old books. Today, you find us downstairs in a West Indian nightclub in London's Oxford Circus in the late 50s. Sunday evening. There's a table of GIs in the corner, petting and sweating. The lager and scotch is flowing, and the scent of Old Spice and Wrigley's gum fills the air. Johnny, the tall barman, has an amused, detached look on his face. It's approaching 10:30 as he starts to call last orders. I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher of Unbound, the platform where readers crowdfund books they really want to read.
And I'm Andy Miller, author of The Year of Reading Dangerously. And today we're joined by two guests making their backlisted debuts, Margaret Busby and Raymond Antrobus. Hello!
Hey.
Raymond Antrobus is a poet, writer, educator and investigator of missing sounds. He is the author of To Sweet and Bitter, The Perseverance and most recently All the Names Given, published by Picador in the UK and Tin House in the US. In 2019, he became the first ever poet to be awarded the Rathbone Folio Prize for Best Work of Literature in any genre. Other accolades include the Ted Hughes Award, PBS Winter Choice, a Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award, and the Guardian Poetry Book of the Year. His debut children's book, Can Bears Ski? Spoilers, I reckon they can. Illustrated by Polly Dunbar, was published last year in the UK by Walker Books, and in the US and Canada by Candlewick Press. His poems, Jamaican British, The Perseverance, and Happy Birthday Moon were added to the UK's GCSE syllabus in 2019. So before you know it, your son will be studying your work with huge pleasure.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's amazing. How do you get notified of that, Ray? How does that happen?
One day you just check your email and it's like, hi, you put your poems on the GCSE national curriculum.
Wow.
Do you get a royalty?
It's very small. But it's funny because I immediately thought of, who was it? Was it Adrian Mitchell who said, oh God, there's no way. That's the last thing I want for my poetry. Kids being forced.
Yeah.
Not more Raymond Antrobus.
Oh, great.
And we're also joined today by Margaret Busby, CBE. She is a legendary publisher, editor, writer and broadcaster. In 1967, she became Britain's youngest and first black female book publisher when she co-founded with Clive Allison the Soho-based publishing house Allison and Busby, which she ran for 20 years, counting Bukti Amekta, Nuruddin Farrar, C.L.R. James, Michael Moorcock and Jill Murphy among them. Michael Moorcock and Jill Murphy, everyone
not
together.
in the same sentence.
I'd also got to thank Margaret personally on the spot right now for changing my life by republishing my favourite book, Absolute Beginners by Colin McInnes, which you brought back into print in 1979 or 1980, along with McInnes's other London novels, and influenced me and I'm sure generations of young British readers.
But let me tell you something about that, because we published that. I think it was 1980 we published those three London novels, Absolute Beginners, City of Spades and Mr. Love and Justice. And it was the books were out for a while. They'd been reviewed, but they hadn't sold brilliantly. And then there was one review, I think it was in the NME, New Musical Express, and it was after that review things took off. So that's one of the only times you could say, well, that one review had an influence.
No,
the film rights sold and so on and so on.
I am an old so-and-so, but I will say that if you grew up in the 1980s, one of the great lucky things you had was that books were covered everywhere.
Totally. And NME book reviews were really important.
Yeah. Margaret edited the groundbreaking anthology Daughters of Africa in 1992 and its follow-up New Daughters of Africa, published by Myriad Editions in 2019. A long-time campaigner for diversity in publishing, she is the recipient of many awards, including the Benson Medal from the Royal Society of Literature in 2017. And in 2020, she was voted one of the 100 Great Black Britons, and last year was awarded the London Book Fair Lifetime Achievement Award.
Amazing.
I'm thrilled we're joined by Antrobus and Busby. That just has such a nice, such a nice ring to it.
We love it. Okay, and the writer we're here to discuss is Andrew Salkey, one of the major figures in late 20th century Caribbean writing, and whose poetry was published by Margaret in the early 1980s. Raymond has chosen his second novel, Escape to An Autumn Pavement, as the main book for discussion. It was first published by Hutchinson in 1960 and reissued in 2009 by the brilliant Peepal Tree Press. It concerns the attempts of the Jamaican Johnny Sobert to make his way in the London of the late 1950s, a city still reeling from the depredations of war. But we'll also be discussing Salkey's poetry, much of it sadly now out of print, particularly the long poem Jamaica, and also Salkey's position among the remarkable group of Caribbean writers that arrived in London in the 1950s. But before we catch the number 13 bus to Soho, Andy, what have you been reading this week?
Thank you. I'm going to talk about a book called All the Sad Songs by a writer and illustrator called Summer Pierre. And this was published in 2018 by Retrofit Comics and Big Planet Comics. And it's a graphic memoir, not graphic in its explicitness.
But using pictures.
Yeah, not a graphic novel, but a graphic memoir. Summer Pierre is a former musician and songwriter. And she's the author of Paper Pencil Life, and she had a wonderful thing in the New Yorker called Sylvia Plath's Last Plan, which you can find online, and I commend to you. But this is a book, I won't lie to you listeners, if you're a member of Generation X and were around in the 1990s and paying attention, then you're very much going to enjoy this memoir. It's about somebody talking about what music meant to them in their 20s, and initially it's about mixtapes, or as British 50-somethings know them, compilation tapes, because let history be clear, no one called them mixtapes back then. They didn't, did they? That wasn't a thing. No. They were called compilation tapes. Anyway, it's about compilation tapes or mixtapes. And okay, so I started reading it. I thought, oh, this is good, and the artwork is beautiful, and it's quite poignant, and she talks about lots of great records from that time. But as the book goes on, it becomes a book much more about the eternal triangle of creativity, response to creativity, and the anxiety which produces it. And actually, it's tremendously moving in terms of Summer Pierre's account of her own breakdown and the role that being a creative person both played in that and helped her recover from. And I was really struck by how unusual it is, not so much to read that in a graphic format, though I suppose it is, but to read something of such emotional intelligence in relation to creativity and the creative impulse. And so if you're interested in what it takes to write a book or write a song or paint a picture, and what part of you that comes from, and the relationship between your ego and your id, who wouldn't be interested in that relationship? I think All the Sad Songs is a book that you would really, really enjoy. Anyway, I thought it was absolutely terrific. I'm just going to read a little bit, although you can't see the picture, so that's a bit strange, isn't it? But I'm going to read you're going to have to take it on trust that the pictures are very beautiful, expressive, and funny. And this is the beginning of part 6, which is called The Last Tape. Summer Pierre is writing in the present here, and she says, "This morning I've been listening to clips on YouTube from the documentary Alive Inside of Alzheimer's patients listening to music. Therapists have discovered that otherwise unresponsive patients animate and recover some cognitive abilities listening to favourite music from when they were young. It's powerful and moving to watch, and somehow it makes complete sense. Anyone who's been at a party or in a car when an unexpected favourite song comes on knows that there's a way music can awaken something in our bodies. I can remember being somewhere and hearing the psychedelic Furs song Pretty in Pink, and for a moment my body was no longer there, but back in the summer of 1986 in the lobby of the Island Theatre in Coronado, California, about to see Pretty in Pink. I could almost smell the popcorn. It is this capacity for music to trigger memory in the body that can also ruin certain soundtracks. I once knew a woman who couldn't listen to Exile in Guyville by Liz Phair because it reminded her of her boyfriend. And then there's a there's a like little picture of the woman saying, he used to put that album on every time we had sex. Now that's all I can think of when I hear Liz Phair. And Summer Pierre is thinking to herself, what a terrible album to have sex to. Anyway, it happens though, she writes on. You huddle around some song or album and gather an emotional light from it. But then time goes on and the experience shifts or changes, and so do the feelings and associations with that music. In Boston, I had used music so much to process pain that after a couple of years, my body started to associate that music with trauma and loss. And listening to music could bring on horrific anxiety attacks. So did playing guitar and attempting to write songs. This has to work. I tried to plough through it. I was like a junkie that couldn't accept that the high of loss didn't work anymore. So I just kept trying to force it and injuring myself more. And finally there came a point when I'd run out of ways to start over. And it seemed to me that it was all endings. And there was nothing left but how broken I was. So I ran. I did the ultimate start over. I packed up my car, I drained my bank account, and I drove across the country to move back to California.
It's great.
So that is all the sad songs by Summer Pierre. You can either buy that as a book, or she's got a Patreon, patreon.com/Summer Pierre, which it's available there as well. She's absolutely terrific, and I commend it to you all. John Mitchinson, what have you been reading this week?
Okay, so I've been reading Aftermath by Preti Taneja, who, former guest, she was on the brilliant episode on Beloved by Toni Morrison. And this book is published by And Other Stories on the 7th of April. So when you're hearing this, it should be just published. And it is, I have to say, one of the most, I think, challenging, harrowing, brilliant books I've read in a long, long time. So the background to the story is that Preti taught on a program in prisons called Learning Together. And on November the 29th, 2019, there was an event at Fishmongers Hall in London, near London Bridge, to celebrate the 5 years of this program of creative writing in prisons. And one of the people who attended there was a man called Usman Khan, who had been a member of the program when he was in prison. He was now out of prison. Anyway, the story is he came to the event, and at the end of the event, he went down to the toilet and he strapped 2 knives onto his hands, taped them to his wrists, put on a fake bomb gas, came out and killed 2 of the people. He injured, I think, 5 people, but 2 of them fatally, Saskia Jones and Jack Merritt, both of whom were part of the Learning Together program. Preti had taught Usman Khan. Jack Merritt had overseen the program that she was teaching on. And as I said, the book really is an attempt to come to terms, to unpack the horror of what happened on that day. And I have to say, there's so many difficulties around this. She writes, this short book is about how a specific act of terrorist violence can shatter, rearrange, and refocus us on what we've always known, what we think we know, and what we choose to believe, and what narrative rushes into those gaps. I think, given the difficulty of the material, people have died, the trauma that she went through, the difficulty of even thinking about writing and the effect that writing has on people's lives, whether things could have happened differently. It's not... amazingly, what comes out of it is a kind of a hybrid. I wouldn't call it exactly a memoir. I wouldn't call it an analysis, although it has deep and profound dimensions of political analysis and personal memoir in it. It's a kind of extraordinary, the difficulty that she's faced with means that she's almost created, I think, a new kind of non-fiction. It's full of quotes from other people, from other writers, from poets, from novelists. I mean, it really is an extraordinary book, and it's come with amazing quotes from Nikesh Shukla and Max Porter and Mona Ashi. I'm just going to read a really small bit to give you a flavour of the prose, and then maybe just a couple of sentences of Preti herself saying what she thinks the book is to do. So this is from somewhere near the beginning, the first half of the book anyway. This is not a confession. This is not a testimony. This is the moment before the frame is exposed. This is a lament, not for one, but for many not yet born. Still, there will always be a prison workshop where she taught story making, inside that room. He, British Asian, Pakistani stroke other, he shared his literary knowledge in class. He worked at his writing. He said he read canonical novels. He said he had plans for work, for writing, for life after release. People saw his creative writing as a sign of rehabilitation, even of possible de-radicalization. It was simply that, like many, he valued the form, a conduit for control and self-expression, the art of convincing others, a version of his extreme drug. Now she doubts. Does making art, wanting to be an art maker, make anyone less likely to harm? It is possible to teach craft and yet to know that making art signifies nothing, except the human imperative to express a life force and to say, this is what I imagine. I know. I was there. Now we are here. Jack is dead and Saskia. And what comes now? Maybe he always meant everything he said and did and thought, all of it and all of the time, and at the same time until he made his final choice. Time is the worst punishment we can give, where death is not for us to inflict. Now we are left with it. Well, I taught him the effect of writing fiction, for example, without full stops. There is only silence, only loss. In the recognition of a history of splitting, there is radical shame, say doubt. The verdict is he always knew and always lied, which means his greatest skill was passing. He was a product of the state. That we can be both alive and dead at the same time, and while we are breathing, do we even know which is which? It's an amazing book. And she says this towards the end, which I think is, she said it's about radical doubt and radical hope, especially in the dark, as Rebecca Solnit calls it. And finally, about the fluid, shining faith, not in a God or in the edicts of any organised religion or institution, but in the necessary fiction we rest our contingent lives on, which in English we call trust. I mean, it's devastating in its analysis of the prison system and what prison does to people. It's also devastating in its account of how on earth do you begin to put your life back together when you've been implicated in an act of terrorism that violent and that unlikely and appalling. So, hugely recommended. Not an easy read, but brilliant, I think.
Tell us what it's called.
It's called Aftermath, and it's by Preti Taneja. It's published by And Other Stories.
We'll be back in just a sec.
Home means something different to everyone. But with Rocket Mortgage, home can mean even more. It can mean a college education, taming your high-interest debt, even a renovation. We've made it easier than ever to use your home equity. That home you worked so hard for, now it can work hard for you. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC, licensed in all 50 states. NMLS ConsumerAccess.org, number 3030.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
And every Monday, Mr. Give me rent. All that I try, I cannot prevent. She telling me, Mr. Give me rent. This is how she start. A lot of restrictions to break your heart. After 10 o'clock, tenants must know my front door is locked. And on the wall she stick up a notice. No lady friends, not even a princess. And if you disagree, out you go immediately. And every Monday, Mr. Give me rent. Poor kitchen, I ain't got a cent. She telling me, Mr. Give me rent.
Well, you never believe what's happened, listeners. Thanks to the magical power of Lord Kitchener and singing My Landlady, we travel forward in time by a week and we're all in the same room together. Listen, say something, everybody.
We're all here. We're all here together.
In person. All here in the same place.
It's a small room and we're all in it.
We were so far away and then the internet broke and so we decided to reconvene together. So we're talking about Andrew Salkey and we're talking about his novel Escape to an Autumn Pavement and his poetry, and we're going to talk about his long poem Jamaica. But I think, Margaret, I would like to ask you first, can you remember when you met Andrew Salkey, or the first time you heard his voice? Because he was a real cultural presence, wasn't he?
He certainly was. I can remember I first met him in 1966, in December, because he interviewed me for a programme on the BBC World Service. I can't remember the name of the programme. It was something like London Echo, because I had just had an article published in the New Statesman, and I was in the Evening Standard London's Diary. I was some sort of freakish, African woman writing. Let's have a picture of her. And anyway,
it's a fabulously glamorous photo, though, Margaret. You look.
It wasn't my car out. They made me sit on.
You're literally sitting in a car.
We'll try and put it on the website. It's got Margaret sitting on the bonnet of an E-Type or something equally 60s-ish.
So that was when I first met Andrew, and it was also the sort of era in which I was beginning to set up a publishing company, Alison & Busby, and we stayed in touch from then on, and we had friends in common. For example, in 1966, actually, that was when the first black publishing company, New Beacon Books, was started by John LaRose. And Alison & Busby published the first titles in 1967. So we all became friends. In 1969, Jessica Huntley's Bogle L'Ouverture started publishing. So there was this little enclave of black-led publishers, let's put it that way. And we all became friends, and Andrew connected with us all. And I think that was a connection that was very strong between Andrew and Bogle L'Ouverture. But he really was a support to everybody in that group, and he together with John LaRose was very instrumental in starting the Caribbean artists movement.
Yeah.
So that was my meeting Andrew dates back to, as far as I can remember, 1966.
And Raymond, when did you first read either Escape to an Autumn Pavement or Jamaica?
So, to be honest, the first kind of presence of Andrew's work was as the book Jamaica, an epic poem. My parents separated when I was really young, and they lived separately, so they had separate bookshelves. But there were a handful of books in which they had the same copy of a book, on their different shelves. And Andrew Salkey's Jamaica was one of those books, and so the kind of presence that the book had, just as an object, was like a family photo. It had that kind of presence about it. I didn't read it until I was, for another 20 years. It was just there as.
But you sort of knew the spine. It was part of your childhood kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
I knew the cover. Even the cover is like a kind of golden sand color. That color is exactly the same color. My dad had this huge carved sculpture of Africa. And so the book is exactly the same color as this sculpture. So I have all of this kind of emotional, I suppose, resonance just with the object of Andrew Salkey's books. But then when I read the book, finally, I was overwhelmed, actually, because I didn't know what to make of it at first. It kind of goes between different times. It's like a history telling, and it's also a kind of folklore, and it's also a kind of witnessing and an account of the island of Jamaica. And
it's not lyric poetry, is it?
It's like it's loads of things at the same time in terms of genre. I know that it took him, I think Eric Huntley recently told me, I think he said 10 years to write. He kind of writing it piece by piece. But I reread it recently, and I happened to read it alongside a Ursula Le Guin short story. What it made me realize is it made me think of Andrew Salkey as a kind of wizard, as a kind of person who's trying to connect with, it's ecological, it is historical, it is like anti-colonial, and in the same way that I think Ursula Le Guin is,
it's brilliant.
About connecting to the land, to your people, to your culture, to your history, to your language. All of that simultaneously is happening throughout the entirety of the poem.
We're going to hear Andrew Salkey himself now talking to Henry Lyman in 1994 about, I think, one of the things that you're just talking about there, Raymond.
I haven't been there for years and years and years, but I hear those sounds all the time. When I lived in England, now that I live in the States, I hear those noises over and over again. And sometimes when it's very noisy where I am, I still hear those noises. In the way that we are all the information we take in, the mixture of thoughts and ideas that weigh in on us as individuals. And these things are forever in motion. And you know why I tend to do this? Because it's the only way of what I would call filling in the distances, you see, from this point to that point. Sure. From the house that I used to live in, to the sea that I ultimately had to cross. From those nurturing old, beautiful voices of the early formation of myself as a human being, to these very new voices in exile.
Yeah, that's great.
What a voice. The other thing is, Margaret, now that is a man who is used to broadcasting, more used to than we are.
It's lovely to hear his voice. He was such a wonderful broadcaster.
And he worked for the BBC a lot, didn't he? So his Caribbean Voices is his programme, right?
And he supported a lot of writers who came through Caribbean Voices, whether it's V.S. Naipaul or Sam Selvon. No, he was really a key character.
There's an interesting bit. One of the other writers of that period, George Lamming, says this thing which hadn't really struck me. And this is in an essay of his called The Pleasures of Exile, which was published in 1960. And he says, the historical fact is that the emergence of a dozen or so novelists in the British Caribbean with some 50 books to their credit or disgrace, and all published between 1948 and 1958, is in the nature of a phenomenon. There has been no comparable event in culture anywhere in the British Commonwealth during that period. And I suddenly got that feeling of excitement. This is something is happening in the novel. I just wondered, Margaret, you were kind of there at the time. Did you feel that excitement that Salkey and Roger Mace and Sam Selvon and George Lamming, that there was this incredible kind of explosion of Wilson Harris, of Caribbean writing?
I was there, though I was much younger than most of the people who were writing or even the other publishers who were there. So it was something that I suppose seeped into my consciousness. But also one of the things that I remember from that era is that most of these writers from the West Indies were being published in the educational series of the British publishing world. So they were really not being published for the British market.
Yeah.
And
Heinemann African Writers series.
Heinemann, Macmillan, all those imprints had an educational bit, which was really for the colonies, I suppose. And also a lot of them the books that were published went out of print. For example, you mentioned George Lamming. I republished a lot of those books in the 70s and 80s. C.L.R. James was another writer from that era who was out of print completely. So they were there, and the excitement was there, and we knew, those of us who were interested knew that they were there and they should be read. But it took a while, I think, for it to seep out into the sort of general consciousness.
I mean, I borrowed a copy of The Emigrants by Lamming from the library last year, and I can't believe that isn't in print. I mean, I know we talk about things that should be in print. That really should be in print as a historical, cultural
artifact.
We're going to be saying that. I'm telling you about Jamaica because it's insane that a poem of this quality isn't in print.
Well, Escape to an Autumn Pavement, which is the novel that we're talking about. I'll read you the blurb in a second, but it's very much in the tradition of the Hampstead bedsitter. Not the Hampstead novel, the Hampstead bedsitter novel. That's a very different category of society. And here, in fact, we've got a clip of George Lamming talking to Hugh Weldon on Monitor in 1960 about that very topic.
George Lamming, 33 years old. The life of a big city suits his temperament. Argumentative, engrossed by ideas, he's at home in London and enjoys the company of what he calls the Hampstead think-talkers.
The terror of not knowing and of not even daring to call upon a single soul among the 100 who surround him. I think that is the initial experience of the West Indian arriving. However tough he is, for the first time in his whole experience, he is alone. Yeah. But one of the things that one must establish is that this world of isolation is not only different, it's strange. Because what he realizes is that this attitude towards him is an attitude which the English themselves share towards each other. Yes. This business of leaving each other on their own is a national characteristic, as dancing is. Yes. Or laughing.
And quite different from anything that happens in the West Indies.
This is why it is so different. Yes. You get settled, and then you too become part of the strangeness. Today, for example, I really don't like being spoken to when I'm traveling in a train.
Well, to be fair, who does? So I'll just read the blurb from the original Hutchinson edition of Escape to an Autumn Pavement, and then maybe we could say a little bit about that book, about our experience of reading that novel now, 60 years after it was published. So this, Margaret, what you were saying about how were these books published? Here is and I will ask you as a publisher to pass judgment on this blurb. Andrew Salkey's powerful first novel was published by New Authors Limited. Escape to an Autumn Pavement, his second book, deals with the impact of London life on a middle-class Jamaican, Johnny Sobert. Johnny has been encouraged to believe that London is, quote, that big cinema of a city where trees are banks and money plus freedom is as easy to come by as leaves on an autumn pavement. He rents an attic room in a Hampstead boarding house, in An Hampstead boarding house, very correct, where he soon discovers that he has exchanged one middle-class miasma for another. Miasma, everyone.
We're loving so fast, top.
Johnny rebels. In his struggle, he encounters the suffocating lust of Fiona, that suffocating lust, and the subtler, disturbing attraction of Dick, name. Mr. Salkey is a highly original writer. His characters are astringent and refreshing, and he has a shrewd grasp of the amorphous English snobberies. It is stimulating to find a West Indian fiction hero wrestling with a problem like his own sexuality, instead of being buried exclusively in the problems of his colour and his exile. Mm. What did we think?
I think the blurb writers worked very hard at that.
Mm. I think that's pretty forward-thinking.
That's good.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah,
right?
that's good.
It's a terrific blurb and gets to the heart of why this book is interesting, because I think that most of the books, to some degree or other, of that generation do deal with issues of exile and race, but sexuality is less obvious.
Ray, what did you think? What did you make of Escape to an Autumn Pavement when you read it?
Man, there's a lot I loved about the book. I could clearly see that it was written by a poet. Mm-hmm. I could the voice, the conciseness. I felt like there were look, in some ways, like this genre of poetry, of literature, is again a personal one for me in the sense that Andrew Salkey is around the same age that my dad was, and my dad wasn't someone who was very forthcoming. And so I feel like I got to know so much about him through actually the literature of people like Andrew Salkey and George Lamming and C.L.R. James, because my dad would have read the same books that Andrew Salkey read. He would have had the same references. He would have had the same, even like similar transgressions, you know. So even that is in the book. I loved that I came back to the UK and I happened to be sitting on Tottenham Court Road, and when I read the first half of the book, and then I'm seeing some of the references, you know, the roads, like, oh wait, it's around the corner from where I am right now. You know, I get a real kind of buzz and joy from being in a literary landscape becomes a real one. And so this book, Escape to an Autumn Pavement, you know, really places me in some of my own personal history. I think that the issue of, like, I suppose Fiona and Johnny and that kind of thing is like, I don't think Fiona is actually a person. I think Fiona is a projection from Johnny as a colonial subject.
Interesting.
And I think
that's very interesting.
You know, in a way that's dehumanizing, obviously, of the woman in this, but I just don't think it's I don't think she's there actually as a character in her own right. I feel like she's a projection, and there's a lot of projections throughout the book, and a lot of kind of internalized pain and hatred and discomfort. You know, everyone seems to have it and projecting it all over the place in the novel. That's what I mean. I think there's a real complexity in this novel, and absolutely,
which doesn't really get resolved.
No, exactly, it doesn't.
It's not a masterpiece, but it is really interesting.
Yes, that's fair.
I mean, I'm gonna say the two things. My two observations were, apart from how much I enjoyed it, because this is very much in my wheelhouse. 60s bedsit. That's my. You say personal connection. That's my personal connection. So I love that element of it. And Margaret, it reminded me of a book that we've already mentioned because you published it. It so reminded me of Absolute Beginners by Colin McInnes. And it seems to me clearly, John, it felt that it had been written fast.
Yeah.
Not much revision, I reckon, in this novel. True. I think get it down.
True.
Do you think, Ray?
Yeah,
there's some of the things
and
you're talking
smokes
about.
Off the page, the anger and the I mean, as you say, it's the dialogue. It's not really dialogue, because Fiona just gets to say, "Give it to me. I love you. Give me more." But he is in his head. He's this roiling kind of. We'll read some bits from it just to give people a flavour. But it's exciting book. It's an exciting book to read, I think.
Margaret, Andrew could write in many different registers, couldn't he?
And he was a prolific writer, full stop. I mean, he must have written 36 books in so many different genres.
Kids' books and
children's books, as you say, poetry, novels, travelogues,
books on communism as well. Non-fiction books about the Missile Crisis, Cuban Missile Crisis.
And he was an anthologist. He was an editor. He collected other people's writings. So he obviously did write fast. He had to write fast to have produced so much. And I think that, well, I connect as well with that personal thing and the localities. Because when I was at university in the 60s, I lived in a hostel in Hampstead.
Did you? Did you?
And also and that crossover between sort of Bohemia and the sort of Colin McInnes type thing and the Caribbean community, which also happened in West London. And I lived in Notting Hill after I graduated, and Andrew was just round the corner. He lived in Moscow Road. And I remember that same connection when I first read, for example, The Lonely Londoners by Samuel Selvon, and seeing a reference to where I lived in that book, Linden Gardens. So it's very powerful when you can make those personal connections, isn't it, Ray? And sort of identify with some of the environment as well as the people who Andrew has created as projections or real people. But he was a brilliant writer.
I feel like I've followed in your footsteps from like Bexhill to Hampstead. If you asked him, it's a silly question really, but if you asked him, what are you? Are you a broadcaster? Are you a poet? Are you a novelist? What is he most likely to have said? Because as you say, he was very prolific and working in all sorts of areas, journalism, the radio, children's books. I've got one of them here, which I read, called Hurricane, which was still in print from Puffin into the 70s and 80s. It was terrific. It was really, and nothing like Escape to an Autumn Pavement, and nothing like Jamaica. They're
And Autumn Pavement's nothing like his first novel,
A
Question of Violence, which is set in Jamaica and is historical and very different style.
So
different style.
And that may be one of the reasons why he's not better known, that he was not, you couldn't pigeonhole him. And I'm not sure that he would have, what label he'd have put on himself, but he was a very supportive person.
Yeah,
he supported other people as writers, as publishers, or as I said, he interviewed me. So he was being very, and he went on to become an academic, a teacher of creative writing and so on. So he was working on so many different levels in so many different ways, and he was always meticulous in everything he did. And even his handwriting was I used to think, I didn't see him doing it, but maybe he wrote with a ruler underneath, because this is
Oh yeah, look. There is. That's his.
So neat. His hand.
We're looking at an inscribed copy of his book of poems, Away, which Margaret.
Can I read this out, Margaret? It is Margaret's copy of Away, poems by Andrew Salkey, which she published. Yeah. For admirable Margaret, with love, Andrew. The poet's choice of word there.
But it's so neat, isn't it?
It's beautiful. I think we should hear from Andrew himself again. What I found very interesting about that blurb that we read out was the idea that they wanted to say he's an exile, but he doesn't only write about exile. And clearly Jamaica is of a piece with that. So let's hear his thoughts on that topic.
We are exiled, or most of us are. I mean, I think that the state of being born is exile. It's as soon as you leave the mother and the father, you leave that state of babyhood, you really do find yourself at sea. The alienation that I sense in what has happened to us West Indians in terms of our economics and our politics and so on, I find that it's essentially a part of that alienation, spiritual desolation. It's not a very happy state to be in, really.
We're saying that the writing has different types of energy depending on what it is, but actually there's a sort of vein of melancholy running through it, I think.
Melancholy and agriculture, I think, are two things that run through everything he writes. He's always writing about the land and weather. Actually,
there's a lot of weather,
a lot of conditions, like natural elements. So I mean, I think he's actually an ecological writer, an ecological thinker, which is another reason why I think he deserves more time in the sun.
And hard to pigeonhole.
Hard to pigeonhole, right? Totally. And I think to this day, black writers, marginalized writers have to fight this kind of, this idea that like if we're writing in a way that's like can be sociological, therefore it's not serious. There's a real I kept noticing that even in some ways that I've seen my own work spoken about. I'm like, this is interesting. There's a recognition of I guess sociological value, but not of literary merit, or not of like literature, capital L literature. And I think Andrew Salkey must have been someone who resisted even needing that kind of validation, and just like a visionary in that sense, and was like, okay, I'm just gonna be open to the energy and write the books which I need to write, and that energy is going to come from me.
That's what you were talking about, Margaret, in terms of how these books were published as well. So they're okay off in their little ghetto, but how do we break them out into the mainstream of literature? And it's an ongoing process.
I'd like to know, actually, I'm not meant to be asking the question. I'd like to know how Andrew has influenced you, Ray, in terms of what you write on.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Salkey's work has given me great permission. He has given me a path to not compartmentalize my interests and my passions. So I am interested in, obviously, history and travel. I am interested in language and the Caribbean and Europe. I am interested in socialism and humanitarianism and social justice. And clearly, Andrew Salkey's work did not stop on the page. It has manifested itself in such a powerful way that when I did my my second fellowship as a poet in the US in Pittsburgh University. And my mentor was an American poet called Robin Coates Lewis, a genius poet. And, we're talking, and I casually mentioned something about Andrew Salkey. And she said, oh, that was my teacher. And then I came back to the UK and I happened to, as you do, like talking with Linton Kwesi Johnson, Linton Kwesi Johnson as well. I was like, oh yeah, he was my first teacher. It's like, what? Then one of my favorite poets, Martin Espada, a Puerto Rican poet, love his work. Martin Espada was a immigration lawyer as well as a poet, I suppose. And I was reading something about him completely randomly, and he just kind of said, yeah, Andrew Salkey was my teacher, my mentor. He's everywhere. He's
incredible
out there, and the fact that he is even part of the journeys of the poets who inspire me is mysticism to me.
Paul Mendes, in his essay on Radio 4, which you can hear on the iPlayer, says that he first encountered Salkey in an exhibition. He was in a photo with a very symbolic photo with Horace Ove and a couple of other writers, and Mendes was going, but who's that guy? He's in all these photos.
Yeah.
Who is it? Yeah. And that's kind of Salkey's blessing and curse, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the poetry. We'll kick off by hearing Salkey himself reading one of his poems. This is called Drifting.
For whom do I speak now, so far away from home? For whom do I write now, so far away from myself? I speak for the experience of the flux I've become. I write for the concrete to fill in the distances from the house on the road I lived on, from the warm home on the sea I crossed, from old voices to the new. And I suppose that's true, to some extent, of shipping oneself far away from port, finding oneself while drifting.
As I say, first-rate poem delivered by a first-rate broadcaster who knew how to use the microphone. That's so good.
It is, yeah.
Margaret, do you have a favourite from the collection that you published?
Yeah, well, that was in the collection
It was.
I published. So, I mean, but every time I reread any of the poems, there's always something new, and there are many of them that resonate still. I don't know where to start. What would I choose? Okay, it opens at the page with this poem. Oh, this isn't appropriate. This is a poem called Looking Back, and it's for Jessica Huntley. Jessica was the co-founder of Bogle L'Ouverture, who published Andrew's work, and Andrew was the director of the company. He was just so supportive of Jessica and the company. So I can understand why he dedicated this poem to her. I can't understand why we beat the sea with our island pain and aspiration. I can't understand why we deny ourselves our sea-locked gold reserves, stacked high in the hills, platted deep in this land. The truth is, I'm beginning to know why all the eyes in our mirror are turned north and northeast. Isn't it really because we haven't looked at the art of our lives in the cloud and curve of our breath prints? That was the poem Looking Back. I'm not a very good reader, but...
No, come on. For shame. It's
Not as good as
beautiful.
Andrew, that's for sure.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate those last lines. We haven't looked at the arc of our lives in the cloud and curve of our breath prints.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting going back to your question, Andy. It feels to me that, I mean, maybe I'm kind of biased, but he was a poet. I mean, in his deepest kind of core, I think he was a poet. And that's what makes Jamaica so exciting to me, because he's doing something in that book which seems incredibly ambitious, which is to tell the story of the Caribbean, not in, as I say, that there are some. He's a beautiful lyric poet, and many of the poems in a way are great. But this is a kind of public, almost sort of telling of folklore, mythological, historical, and a huge ambition, I think.
Yeah.
An incredible technique.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to get Ray to read us a bit of Jamaica in a minute, but I'm going to read what I consider to be a poem from Escape to an Autumn Pavement. And I'd like to cross-reference this, listeners. Go back to our Absolute Beginners episode and find the passage that I read from Absolute Beginners, which is a late night scene in Soho, which is one of the most beautiful bits of writing. And here's Salkey's version of something very similar from early on in Escape to an Autumn Pavement. 10:30 in Oxford Street with its squeaking silences under shutters. Wonderland beacons continue their ogling unashamedly with the traffic lights. Sticky, biscuit, sweet, soggy lovers huddle together in a make-believe which excludes mom and pop. Can feel the presence of cash registers along the street. Mania for presences. But this is different. The moment is magic. The weightiness is different. It's haunting. Metallic Buddha kind of weightiness. Plump and couchant in a way. A threat. Hundreds of presences on both sides of the street. Yet it's always a joy to know that they're out of action and are unable at the moment to make it off you. To suck you in and spit you out minus your bus fare. Doesn't really matter, does it? They'll catch you early Monday morning just the same. Catch you with their pre-national service male attendants and pimply sales girls, their thin, grubby late-night collars and cigarette-stained forefingers. They'll catch you with brisk American-style sales patter salted intermittently with brash Cockney aplomb. And who doesn't really want to be gurgling inside when you say, look at this, my dear, Selfridges for 9 and 11, would have had to pay anything up to 12 and 6 along Regent Street. And of course, you've already docked 2 and 7 off the 12 and 6 merely to feel nice and warm inside, haven't you? That's beautiful. Actually, you know what? That steps up a level when you read it aloud. That's very interesting. Isn't it? Doesn't it? Isn't that rich? You can hear the internal rhythms much more clearly. Well, we're going to hear from Andrew Salkey again, talking about in a minute, talking about some of his poetry. But I think we should move on to Jamaica in earnest. Ray, what is this poem/book about?
So it's a.
Gotcha.
Got me. You know, any if that question posed at any worthwhile poetry is going to be.
It's like the Woody Allen thing about War and Peace. It's about Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a kind of channel. It's a kind of sustained emotional meditation by a soothsaying, timeless wizard.
I love that. Well done. Brilliant. That does answer my question.
I think you should have read the blurb of the first edition.
Can you read the blurb on the first edition, Margaret?
Oh,
yeah,
I'll read it.
Yeah, please.
This says, this is a poem about Jamaica, about the experience of the slave trade and of colonization, and about a struggle for freedom and for identity which still rages today among Caribbean peoples. It deals with political issues, but is not simply a political poem. Rather, it conjures up the swirling colours, the music, the moods, the atmosphere of a bustling, suffering, vital island community. Jamaica has been 20 years in the writing and is the very first poem of its kind published by a Jamaican writer. That was in 1973.
Wow.
And it has that thing, doesn't it, where time, that's what I love about it, is all these time periods are coexisting. It does that which you kind of can only do with poetry. Yes. It would be difficult to make this into fiction. Yes.
So there are leaps through time from section to section in the poem. Ray, I found it a fascinating mixture of challenging and compulsive. That I really struggled with some of the early sections, but I kept being pulled through it and feeling that he needed me to get somewhere with him. There's a real urgency to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you picked that up or whether your reading experience was different the first time.
No, it did pick it up because in terms of the structure, all the way through, short line, high kind of energy, high lyric, so you're compelled to just keep reading because the language, it tumbles over itself and it even goes in and out of dialect and conversation. Like he brings in his family, he talks to his aunt, he talks to, his neighbors, and then it goes into like what almost textbook history language. When it comes out of that into patois, and it's quite dated in some of those ways. Some of the patois, even that wouldn't be recognizable to modern day Jamaican society. Some of it, which I know goes back to that thing I was saying about how this book to me, as well as an incredible, compelling poem, was just as an object. It survived. It's sustained. It's here. It's out of print. But I feel like I really want to be one of the people to bring it back.
Who knows? But a bit like we were saying about The Emigrants by George Lamming, I read this and thought, well, this should be in print. There's a literary and societal need for this to be available for people to read.
Just with my publishing head on, Monique Roffey's Mermaid of Black Conch, which is, I think, a great novel, and it's a massive bestseller. And you think, if you want to put some context from the culture that this is coming from, this is one of the. That's true. It feels to me like one of the great texts of I mean, I'm not an expert on Caribbean poetry, but it's the fact that this isn't available and talked about.
I think it tells you something about the publishing climate and why things are allowed to go out of print and why they're brought back into print.
Well, I did want to ask you the question, Margaret. When you were starting Alison and Busby, I mean, did you have a clear mission to want to try and spring? Because you published all kinds of books that you didn't want to be publishing into a ghetto. You wanted to spring, black writers into the mainstream.
It wasn't anything as conscious as that. We were publishing books that we thought were interesting.
Brilliant.
It should be in print, and that's why George Lamming is out of print. Okay, let's reprint George Lamming. Let's reprint C.L.R. James. Let's reprint Colin McInnes. Let's reprint American writers.
Yeah.
It was
taste by taste and quality, and
it was naivety perhaps, or idealism, but it was not based on any sort of convention or any.
You were making up your own rules. I think.
Exactly.
Well, because 4 of the rare surviving copies of Jamaica are gathered in this room with us.
What I like is about the fact that I think this must be Andrew's copy because it's got
some very neat annotations and handwriting.
Wow.
Look at that.
Okay, I'm going to need to see that.
Isn't that incredible?
Wow.
It's different from our edition, Ray.
Yours has got the corrected
we've got the
line.
Corrected, yeah.
So, because people can't easily get hold of this, Ray, would you share a passage that you feel it's hard, isn't it? Representative is hard, but a bit
just
you
good.
like.
Part of the journey.
There you go.
What I'll do is I'll read this and just, I'm just dropping you in to the moment and the momentum of this epic poem. There was that spark that moved the land, that rumbling, shifting, accustomed response while you, knowledgeable, patient, watched the pelican rip breast to belly. Ex-maker, provident, paradoxical, poor child of 1,000 loves, Caribbean, leaping levitator, muscle to prise up the granite structure out of our weaker streams, elegant, maternal, instead of making us burn in the dry lands of failure day after day, instead of that alternative, lose the peak deep inside you, Caribbean, victim of careless systems, absorber of blows, hear the cry from Diablo's bedrock, from the brutally shaved heads crowding our festering tenements, soon to be planned for, soon to be bulldozed, Caribbean, prepare a path. Soon your scorpion times will be sucked in by someone's passing interests or other than spat out again a step nearer another banner's stab, the breaking of newer milestones. Soon names like Penn and Venables would be with the new course of conquest run rivers everywhere through your shell-marked yards. So,
I'm saying it now. We've got to do is we've got to fund you doing an audio version of the whole thing.
I'd do it.
I mean, honestly,
but really, great idea.
Because suddenly, as you said earlier, Andy, suddenly you see what this poem that really just it catches fire.
Yeah.
Can you give us another bit?
Another bit. Oh,
I'm
cool.
actually.
Wow.
You've got an encore.
Do the hurricane bit if you want to do that. I mean,
right.
I'm not reading from it now. I can tell you.
I mean,
no way. I know my limitations.
Okay, I'll try this one. I haven't really practiced this one out, but yeah. Okay, so this is a little section, and it's called Hurricane 1951. I remember the night. Black with slack rain, flaccid when it first began, but with brick drops beating later on like jump poco drum thumps beating back the coming morning, beating with purpose, routine, rhythm and ritual, beating like the bounce of batter hide battered or a shoemaker's block, batter hide battered, pain shattered pain, batter hide, pain shattered through to dawn. One bad, sneaking breeze blow take time and creep up on Giorgio life and tear him shirt tail like bud feather. Brock him one room in two like true stick. Kill him common law wife. Kill him fought for goat. Kill him lying hen them. And go away soft like teeth. Like it wasn't causing no butters. Instead the land at all. So what's happening in this is even like concrete, so you can see the shape of the poem is also like a hurricane.
It is concrete. It's amazing.
It's all this stuff.
You know what we've done very well keeping Backlisted going for the last 2 years, doing it on the internet. But I can tell you now, there is nothing more spine-tingling than sitting in a room with someone reading one of their favourite things with the level of commitment you just did there, Ray. What a beautiful moment. Thank you.
Oh.
Wow. Well, it seems right that we hear from the man himself again. This is a poem that I couldn't find anywhere, which I think is called The Tourists. So it may have been written later in his career. And he gives it a little introduction here, which I found very illuminating. This is Andrew Salkey talking about and then reading The Tourist.
My island has always, for me, been a tourist island. I used to find it difficult to take holidays. Don't know why, but somehow I resented the holiday that we offered to others and not to ourselves. As a child, I would see lots of cameras and shorts and pretty shirts and so on. You know, people wanting to take a picture want to manage you. However briefly, they want to arrange you and prettify you and so on. The trees were thin and scarred. February Phildyke had knocked them about. They seemed on the teeter of disappearing before spring. The family, who stood in front of the split bark of the ravaged trees, was battered and tired of making do on stale air and stone promises from the bullies in the capital city. They, in turn, had lashed themselves to northern prongs and were themselves bullied in return. The tourists took photographs while talking trees and weather and rocks to the family. They talked high fluting, and the family stood on the slant, gaunt, loose-limbed. It was talk that was accurately space-filling. It was slippery, swerving away from politesse into condescension. It was something like Punic faith that the tourists had offered the family, and no doubt the tourists felt like traitors to ordinary human concern. They clicked away fiercely, as though they had deadlines, as though the family and the trees and the weather and the rocks were assigned cemetery property.
I found this episode totally fascinating to prepare, Margaret, because I thought we were going to talk about one set of things, and the presence of the work and the presence of his voice has led us to talk about a different set of things, which is really lovely, spontaneous moment. I mean, if you were to recommend a good starting point to Andrew Salkey or his work, is there one strand of it that you prefer, or should you just kind of throw yourself in?
I think perhaps I resonate mostly with his poetry, but I think he was such a good writer of every kind. So he's written books that were excellent travelogues, Havana Journal. So he I would say anytime you can find a book by Andrew Salkey, read it, and you'll find something that will inspire you, nurture you, help you keep going. In fact, one of the phrases that I always associate with Andrew, he used to sign his letters off, was "keep on keeping on." And his work, to me, helps me do just that.
Well, People Tree Press have got quite a few of his books in print. I've actually got one at home which I didn't bring with me called Riot. Have you got that?
Oh, no, I've not.
So that's another children's book about. And clearly, his 4 children's books are based on things that happened to him growing up. The hurricane, the riots in. I'm really looking forward to reading that. Ray, what's the best way to get hold of his work at the moment? I mean, coming round your house and
coming by my house and sitting on my sofa and be patient while I dig them all out. I really value libraries and our libraries, so I did actually look up on a couple of library catalogues just out of curiosity to see if they stock his books. Senate House had a few copies. So here's the thing, right? I was talking about bookshops and access. My parents got Andrew Salkey's books in a shop which is no longer there, a black radical bookshop, which was in Hackney, called Centerprise. And this bookshop, as a kid, they would walk in and they might see Jean Binta Breeze, and they might see George Lamin, or they might see, someone traveling, coming in. They might see, Margaret Busby. We might see anyone there. Eric and Jessica Huntley. Like, it was like a home. It was like a hub. And I've got a few memories of, standing in that shop and just people, just walking in and out, and the conversations that were happening. And spaces like that weren't protected. They're gone. Some libraries are stocking them, but I think we need more demand. People don't know what they're missing.
No, I think that's the thing, isn't it? And that's the thing about you saying about books going out of print, Margaret. When they go and they disappear, it needs publishers to bring them back.
So, congratulations to People Tree for doing that with.
Oh, brilliantly.
No use you complain, you wasting your time, you talking in vain. Because when she get her fees, she couldn't care less if you vex her, please. And the rent is all on the level, 4 guineas for single or double. Boys, that landlady bad, she was than the landlord from Trinidad. And every Monday, Mr. Give me my rent. All that I try, I cannot prevent, she telling me, Mr. Give me my rent.
So thanks so much for joining us today, Margaret. Is there any message you would like to leave people with that we didn't say about Andrew or Andrew's work or him as a person? Or
I am just so thrilled that he was a part of my publishing career as well as a friend. And here we are in Soho, and I can remember my office was round the corner for 20 years, and Andrew came to visit us there. So,
So we gathered together in a room, and we've read his work and we've celebrated his life. It feels very good, doesn't it? That feels like a good thing to have done to this morning.
So.
Ray, is there anything left for you that you would like to say about Andrew?
About Andrew, I just want to say thank you. Give thanks. I'm very much part of his, lineage. I feel blessed to have got to spend time with his work, and to share that on Backlisted. I just want to say that Backlisted has a bit of a soft spot with me because when I discovered it, you were talking about so many books that were on my mum's very obscure bookshelf. I wasn't growing up, even though both my parents, they were fairly literary, but outside of the household, I didn't really have much kind of literary culture, I suppose. So I'd be reading all of these books kind of in private. And it wasn't until finding your podcast, Backlisted podcast, that I was able to kind of revisit and rethink and refeel actually about so many different of those books that I pulled off my mum's bookshelf from, Malcolm Lowry, Ian Fleming and Beryl Gilroy and Robert M. Pirsig and Herman Hesse. It's just countless. It's actually pretty, again, another kind of mysticism to me, how much of your books that you've covered and spoke about on this podcast are on my mum's bookshelf. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
and we want to thank her.
Yeah. Thanks to Ray's mum for it's amazing the books that last. Books that last.
Thanks very much, Ray. Thanks, Margaret. And we are going to leave you with our theme music, and then it seems only right that the last voice you'll hear will be Andrew Salkey's reading his poem, After Reading There Is a Truth More Ancient Than Eden. So see you next time, everybody. And thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
I like your way of seeing the flux and rush of everything as a sure way of seeing clearly everything there is to see. I really do. As a flood man myself, born just below your house, in a house like yours, I'm sure you know I understand your way. It's mine too. But my thing's been rushed off center by living years away from home, by seeing everything in bits and pieces, not as the whole you know you see yours as, flooding along the freeway in name only, making it all seem logically yours and bearable. Yet I do know your way. I think I know it well, like the inevitable downpour from the hills, the yes and no of everything we live through. I like your way of seeing
If you prefer to listen to Backlisted without adverts, you can sign up to our Patreon. It's
and made it all my own,
www.patreon.com/Backlisted.
Absurdly
as well as getting the show early, you get a whole 2 extra episodes of what we call Locklisteds, which is Andy, me, and Nikki talking about the books, music, and films we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight.